The ballroom was supposed to witness a royal comeback, but what unfolded instead looked like a public collapse nobody could hide. Prince Harry walked into Melbourne expecting applause, prestige, and proof that his star power still mattered. What he allegedly found were rows of empty chairs, silent aisles, and a brutal question hanging in the air: had the world simply stopped showing up? 3 days before the event, insiders claimed the room looked like a ghost zone. Hundreds of seats covered, sections darkened, curtains adjusted to disguise the damage. This was not just weak attendance. This was panic management. Ticket prices that reportedly began at elite levels were slashed again and again, each cut more desperate than the last. Premium access became discount access. Then digital passes were pushed. Then giveaways. And still, the crowd did not come. Imagine the shock of a man once treated like global headline gold now staring at a room that could not be filled even after the price collapsed. Sources described the backstage mood as icy. Screens showing live numbers. Staff whispering. Assistants avoiding eye contact. Harry allegedly peered through the curtain more than once, searching for a last-minute miracle that never arrived. Every minute before stage time became heavier than the last. Every empty chair became louder than applause ever could be. This was not just about one speech. It felt like a referendum on everything built since leaving royal life. And then came the financial sting. Reports claimed the speaking fee attached to the event was far below the $1 million aura once linked to his name. Worse, security and travel costs were said to be massive. If true, the mathematics of prestige had turned upside down. The prince who once symbolized priceless access was now allegedly fighting invoices, logistics, and shrinking returns. In public, the stage remained polished. Behind the scenes, the numbers may have been merciless, but the humiliation was not only financial, it was emotional. Witnesses described a room with thin applause, awkward pauses, and energy that never lifted. A speech can survive criticism. It can survive hostile headlines. But surviving indifference? That is harder. Indifference is colder than outrage. Indifference says people no longer care enough to react. And for someone whose life has always existed under attention, that silence would hit like thunder. Then the whispers began. Why was he still doing this? Why was the content always circling the same pain, the same past, the same wounds? Critics have long argued that grievance can create curiosity once, maybe twice, but eventually audiences demand evolution. They want answers, ideas, transformation. If all they hear is old hurt packaged in new lighting, they move on. Melbourne, according to this narrative, may have exposed exactly that fatigue. What makes the story even sharper is the contrast. Back in Britain, the institution Harry walked away from continues to function through ritual, discipline, distance, and continuity. Whatever one thinks of monarchy, it understands image management. Harry chose exposure instead. He traded mystery for confession, palace walls for microphones, silence for documentaries, interviews, and memoir revelations. For a time, that strategy paid. Then the market may have asked the question no brand once asked: what's next? And when there is no clear answer, momentum dies fast. The world loves rebellion when it feels fresh. It loses interest when rebellion becomes routine. That is the trap many public figures fall into. They mistake attention for loyalty. Attention is temporary. Loyalty must be earned repeatedly. If Melbourne truly reflected collapsing demand, then it was not one bad night. It was years of brand erosion arriving all at once. Some accounts painted an even sadder picture later that night. Harry alone, staring at his phone, replaying old moments from happier eras. Whether literal or symbolic, it captures something powerful. A man haunted by previous versions of himself. The smiling prince at the royal wedding. The adored soldier prince. The younger rebel still protected by palace machinery. Those identities carried weight. The independent global speaker identity seems far more fragile. And where was Meghan in all this? That question fuels endless speculation because absence creates theories. If one partner shines elsewhere while the other faces embarrassment alone, people read meaning into every mile of distance. Is it strategy? Is it scheduling? Is it emotional separation? Nobody outside the inner circle truly knows. But perception matters, and perception can be cruel. In moments of public defeat, even silence gets interpreted as betrayal. Now insiders are asking what comes next. Retreat from live speaking? Rebrand again? Quiet reconciliation with old royal structures? Another media project? Every option carries risk. Every move now will be judged through the lens of Melbourne. That is how collapses work. One night becomes a symbol. One one-week turnout becomes shorthand for a much bigger decline. The deepest lesson may have nothing to do with royalty. It is about confusing fame with value. Fame gets you headlines. Value gets people to buy tickets, trust ideas, and return for more. Fame can survive scandal. It cannot survive boredom. If the Melbourne disaster was real in the way described, then Harry's true crisis is not money, not critics, not tabloids. It is relevance. Because when the chairs stay empty, when discounts fail, when the old story no longer sells, a brutal truth enters the room, people are not rejecting who you were. They are rejecting what you have become. And that kind of silence is almost impossible to outrun. But the real storm may have only started after the lights went off. Public embarrassment can be survived. Bad press can be managed. One failed event can be spun as scheduling problems, marketing mistakes, unlucky timing. But what happens when the failure is not isolated? What happens when it exposes cracks that were already spreading beneath the surface for years? That is where this story turns darker. Because Melbourne may not have been the disaster itself. It may have been the evidence of a much larger collapse already in motion. Inside brand circles, reputation is currency, and once that currency weakens, every deal becomes harder. Invitations slow down, fees shrink quietly, calls become polite delays, meetings become we'll revisit next quarter. No one announces your decline. They simply move on without you. That is what makes status loss so brutal. It happens in silence. And for someone who once lived in a world where doors opened automatically, the closing of those doors must feel suffocating. Melbourne, if insiders are right, may have been the first time the outside world saw what private decision makers had already decided long ago. Think about the psychology of that moment. Harry was once introduced as a prince, a war veteran, a symbol of modern royalty, a figure who could walk into any room and instantly command fascination. Then suddenly he is introduced as a speaker selling perspective in a market flooded with CEOs, athletes, scientists, survivors, and entrepreneurs who offer practical value. In that arena, titles fade quickly. Legacy gets attention, but expertise keeps attention. And that is where critics say the imbalance became impossible to hide. For years, Harry's message leaned heavily on trauma, healing, family wounds, mental health, and liberation from old systems. Those topics matter deeply, but audiences eventually ask the next question. Where is the evolution? Where is the blueprint? Where is the evidence of growth beyond pain? If the same themes repeat without transformation, sympathy can turn into fatigue. Melbourne may have been the moment that fatigue finally became visible in numbers no publicist could disguise. Then there is the personal image problem, which may be even more dangerous than weak ticket sales. Harry built a global narrative around courage, truth, and choosing freedom over duty. That story inspired many, but stories must stay consistent. When the years pass and the promised golden future looks unstable, expensive, chaotic, or resentful, audiences begin re-evaluating the original pitch. They wonder whether rebellion was wisdom or impulse. They wonder whether freedom came with a cost nobody calculated. And once the public starts asking those questions, image repair becomes much harder. Meanwhile, back in Britain, the monarchy continued its oldest trick, endurance. No matter how outdated critics call it, institutions often outlast personalities because institutions move slowly, absorb blows, and rely on continuity instead of emotion. Harry chose the opposite path: speed, exposure, emotional truth, direct narrative warfare. That path can create explosive momentum, but it also burns hot and burns fast. If Melbourne symbolized anything, it may be that institutions can wait while individuals run out of fuel. And what of Meghan? Her presence hovers over every chapter of this saga, whether she is physically there or not. Supporters see her as a woman unfairly blamed for everything. Critics see her as a strategist always protecting her own trajectory. But the truth is likely more complex. Power couples are brands, and brands under pressure reveal fault lines. If one half keeps pivoting while the other looks stuck, imbalance becomes obvious. If one half seeks reinvention while the other keeps revisiting old wounds, tension becomes inevitable. The public may never know what happens behind closed doors, but they can sense when two narratives are no longer moving at the same speed. That is why the unanswered question after Melbourne is not simply, was the event a flop? It is, what does this mean for the Sussex project itself? Because this was never just a marriage story. It was a business model, a media model, a symbolic model built on the idea that leaving the palace would unlock greater relevance, greater wealth, greater authenticity. If the speaking circuit weakens, streaming deals cool, public trust fractures, and fresh ideas do not arrive, then the whole experiment faces a brutal test. Some insiders speculate Harry may seek a quieter future, less spotlight, fewer speeches, more charitable appearances, a softened tone toward family, even distant forms of reconciliation with British British royal family structures once condemned. Not a grand return with balcony waves and trumpets. Nothing that's cinematic, more likely a slow thaw. Occasional contact, carefully negotiated boundaries, practical dependence hidden beneath polite distance. That would be the ultimate irony. The man who left to escape the machine needing some version of the machine to stabilize what came after. Others believe he will double down instead. Another memoir, another documentary. Another confession cycle framed as courage against powerful forces. That path still offers headlines, but headlines are not the same as renewal. The danger of using pain as content is that eventually audiences sense the transaction. Once vulnerability feels monetized, trust slips away. And trust, once damaged, is more expensive to win back than any security invoice or speaking fee. There is also the emotional cost rarely discussed. Public figures are often mocked as if they do not feel humiliation, but humiliation under global scrutiny cuts differently. Ordinary people fail in private. Celebrities fail in public memory. If Harry truly stood before sparse applause in Melbourne, that image may replay in his mind long after headlines fade. Empty rooms haunt louder than angry crowds because they offer no enemy to fight, only absence. And that may be the central tragedy here. Harry once fought external enemies, press intrusion, family conflict, royal hierarchy, public expectations. Those battles gave him identity. But what happens when the enemy becomes irrelevance? You cannot sue irrelevance. You cannot expose irrelevance. You cannot blame irrelevance on palace aides or tabloids. You can only outwork it, outgrow it, or be swallowed by it. So where does the road lead now? Maybe to reinvention. Maybe to retreat, maybe to reconciliation, maybe to deeper chaos. But one thing feels clear: Melbourne changed the optics. It turned abstract criticism into a vivid scene people can picture instantly. Rows of seats, fading prestige, a prince searching for applause that never arrived. In media, symbols matter more than spreadsheets. And this symbol is devastating. The harshest truth of all is that Harry may still be famous, but fame without momentum becomes a museum piece. People recognize it, talk about it, even photograph it, but they do not invest in it. They move on to what feels alive. If he wants to reverse this slide, he will need more than interviews, more than blame, more than nostalgia for who he used to be. He will need substance strong enough to replace the crown he once carried. Because in the end, Melbourne was not about ticket numbers. It was about a man discovering that identity borrowed from history expires when history no longer carries you. And if he cannot build something real beyond that borrowed glow, the empty chairs may not be the worst thing waiting ahead. They may have been the warning.